Every single year, people walk into the Amazon and simply stop existing. No trace, no signal, no goodbye. And the strange part is, scientists, explorers, and locals will all tell you the same thing. The jungle does not lose people. It keeps them. On purpose. The Amazon River system is the largest, strangest, most biologically overwhelming place on the surface of this planet. It holds 1/5 of all the freshwater on Earth. It generates its own weather. It contains species that have not changed since the age of dinosaurs, and it is still hiding things that no research budget has ever fully explained. Not legends, not rumours. Documented, peer-reviewed, satellite-confirmed things that should not be possible, and yet are sitting there, right now, in the green dark, doing exactly what they have always done. Today, we are counting down 13 of the most jaw-dropping, science-defying, and genuinely unsettling secrets buried inside the world's greatest river system. We are going from 13 all the way down to number 1. And the order matters because this list builds. Every entry is stranger than the last. Every entry raises the stakes a little higher. And by the time we reach number 1, you will understand why even people who have spent their entire lives studying this place still describe it in a single word. Fear. Number 1 is the kind of thing that stays with you. The kind of thing you describe to someone the next day and watch their face change. We are not going to spoil it here, but we will say this. It involves a living creature, a human ritual, and a level of endurance that makes everything else on this list feel comfortable by comparison. 13 entries, 1 river, 0 explanations that will fully satisfy you. Let's go. At number 13, we are starting with something that looks, genuinely, like a mistake, like someone forgot to hit render on a visual effect. Like the planet itself got confused about how rivers are supposed to work. Just outside the city of Manaus, in the heart of Brazil, 2 enormous rivers collide. One is the Rio Negro, dark, almost black, the colour of cold espresso, stained by centuries of decaying leaves and organic matter from the forest floor. The other is the Rio Solimões, pale yellow, almost sandy, thick with sediment carried down from the Andes. These are not small tributaries. Together they form what most of the world simply calls the Amazon River. And when they meet, something extraordinary happens. Nothing. They refuse to mix. For 6 full kilometers, the 2 rivers run side by side in the same channel, separated by a razor-sharp border visible from satellite imagery, flowing like 2 strangers on the same sidewalk who have decided, firmly, that they want nothing to do with each other. The reason is not mystical, though it looks it. The 2 rivers have different temperatures, different densities, different flow speeds. The black water moves slower and sits at around 28 degrees Celsius. The yellow water is cooler and faster. Physics simply will not allow them to blend. Not immediately, not there. And so for those 6 kilometers, you can stand in a boat at the exact boundary line and dip one hand into cold, dark water and the other into warm, pale water at the same time. Locals have been doing exactly that for generations, and it still stops people mid-sentence every single time. It is the perfect opening to a countdown about the Amazon, because it establishes the single most important rule of this entire river system. The normal laws you rely on, the ones that tell you how water behaves, how nature organizes itself, what is and is not possible, do not apply here. And if that is where we are starting, at number 13, with rivers that refuse to obey physics, you should probably buckle in, because what comes next makes this look like a warm-up. At number 12, we need to talk about a place that technically exists within the Amazon basin, follows none of its rules, and has developed one of the most unexpectedly logical and completely surreal law enforcement systems anywhere on Earth. Marajo Island sits at the mouth of the Amazon River, where the river finally surrenders to the Atlantic Ocean. It is enormous. We are talking about a landmass roughly the size of Switzerland, tucked inside Brazil like a country within a country. And during the wet season, which is not a polite drizzle but a months-long inundation, significant portions of this island disappear underwater entirely. The ground that remains is not ground in any conventional sense. It is a kind of suspended mud, a bottomless, wet geography that has defeated every wheeled vehicle ever introduced to it. Trucks sink, motorcycles vanish. Even purpose-built off-road equipment has been swallowed whole by terrain that looks solid from a distance and is absolutely not. So the local police force made a decision that is either obvious or completely insane, depending on where you are standing. They ride water buffalo. Asian water buffalo, the same animal domesticated across Southeast Asia for thousands of years, were brought to Marijo Island sometime in the 19th century, and they adapted to the flooded landscape with a thoroughness that no machine ever managed. They can weigh up to 800 kilograms. They move through chest-deep mud with something approaching indifference. And today, uniformed officers in bulletproof vests, carrying standard-issue equipment, patrol the island's most inaccessible regions on the backs of these enormous horned animals, because it is genuinely the most effective option available. There is something about that image that refuses to leave you. A police officer on horseback is a historical tradition. A police officer on a water buffalo, wading through a swamp the size of a European nation, is something else entirely. It is the Amazon reminding you, again, that it writes its own rules, and everything you think you know about how civilization organizes itself gets revised the moment you cross into its territory. Which brings us to number 11. And this one lives in the water itself. At number 11, we are going into the water, and we are meeting something that should not exist in a river. Not because it is dangerous, though it is. Not because it is enormous, though it can be. But because it is pink. Genuinely, unmistakably, sometimes flamingo-bright pink. The Amazon River dolphin, known locally as the Boto, is the largest freshwater dolphin on Earth, and it has been confusing scientists and terrifying villagers for as long as anyone along the river can remember. The pink coloration is not a trick of the light. It intensifies with age, with excitement, with physical activity. Some individuals are a pale blush. Others are the deep rose of a fresh bruise. The older males especially can be a colour that looks less like a living animal and more like something someone painted on a dare. But the biology is almost secondary to what the Boto means to the people who live alongside it. Across dozens of Amazonian communities, the Boto is not an animal. It is a shapeshifter. A spirit that emerges from the river at night, wearing a white suit and a hat, always a hat, to conceal the blowhole on top of its head, and walks into village dances to charm people before slipping back into the water before dawn. This story, in variations, is told from the mouth of the river all the way to the Peruvian border. Scientists note it with careful neutrality. Locals do not require scientific validation. They have been watching the river longer than any research institution has existed. What no one disputes is this. The Boto can rotate its head 90 degrees in either direction, a flexibility no ocean dolphin possesses. It navigates flooded forests, trees fully submerged, zero visibility, using sonar alone. Threading between trunks in complete darkness, at speed. It is perfectly adapted to a world that floods and transforms and rearranges itself seasonally. In other words, it belongs here in a way that feels almost intentional. And speaking of things that feel intentional, number 10 is about something the Amazon does not have. Something so obvious, so expected, that its absence is almost more shocking than anything we have described so far. At number 10, we arrive at something that should be so obvious it barely registers as a question, and then the moment you actually ask it, you cannot stop thinking about it. Here is the question. The Amazon River is over 6,400 kilometers long. It is the most voluminous river on Earth. Millions of people live along its banks. Major cities, including Manaus, with a population of over 2 million, sit directly on its shores. And yet, across the entire length of the main channel, not a single bridge, not one, nowhere. You cannot drive across the Amazon River, not at Manaus, not at Santarém, not anywhere along the main stem from the Andes to the Atlantic. People cross by boat, by ferry, by small wooden canoes that look completely inadequate for the task, and they have been doing exactly that for generations. The reason is not poverty. It is not political failure or lack of ambition. Engineers have looked at this problem seriously, and the river itself is the answer. During flood season, the Amazon does not simply rise, it transforms. Water levels climb 15 meters or more. The river spreads outward, sometimes 50 kilometers wide, swallowing forests and roads and anything else in its path. It carries floating islands of tangled vegetation, root systems the size of city blocks, moving at speed, capable of striking a concrete pillar with the force of a freight train. The engineering challenge is not building a bridge. It is building something that survives a river that seasonally becomes an inland sea, carrying its own debris field. No design has ever fully solved that problem. The Amazon is not waiting to be bridged. It is simply doing what it has always done, moving on its own terms, indifferent to the infrastructure ambitions of the species living beside it. And if that feels like a place that refuses to be tamed by engineering, wait until you hear what happened when one of the most powerful industrialists in American history decided to build an entire city inside the jungle. And the jungle had other plans entirely. At number 9, we arrive at one of the most haunting things the Amazon has ever swallowed. And this time, what it swallowed was not a person. It was an entire American city. In the 1920s, Henry Ford was the most powerful industrialist on Earth, and he had a problem. The global rubber supply was controlled by British trading companies, and Ford needed rubber, millions of tons of it, for the tyres going onto every Model T rolling off his assembly lines. His solution was characteristically enormous in ambition and characteristically blind to everything it ignored. He would build his own rubber empire right in the heart of the Brazilian Amazon. He acquired a land concession roughly the size of Tennessee, hired engineers, shipped in materials, and began constructing a town from scratch in the jungle. Not a camp, not a facility, a town. White clapboard cottages with green shutters, a hospital, a school, a golf course, a cinema showing American films, a water tower, a main street. He called it Fordlandia, and he intended it to be proof that American industrial logic could be imposed on any geography, any climate, any ecosystem on the planet. It could not. The rubber trees Ford's engineers planted were packed too closely together, efficient by the logic of a factory floor, catastrophic by the logic of a rainforest. A fungal blight called South American leaf blight moved through the plantation like a fire, tree by tree, destroying years of work. Meanwhile, the workers Ford had recruited from across Brazil were being asked to live by Michigan factory rules. No alcohol, mandatory square dancing, cafeteria food that included oatmeal, which nobody in the Amazon had ever been asked to eat before or had any interest in eating. The tension boiled over into a full riot in 1930. Ford poured more money in. The jungle kept winning. By 1945, Ford's company quietly sold the entire operation back to the Brazilian government for almost nothing. Today, the water towers still stand. The factory halls are still there, roofless, rusting, wrapped in vines. The jungle is digesting Fordlandia, one wall at a time, And it is doing so with the patient indifference of something that was always going to win. It is one of the most atmospheric ghost towns on the planet, and one of the clearest lessons the Amazon has ever taught. But if Fordlandia is about what happens when human ambition meets the jungle, number 8 is about what happens when the ocean itself decides to fight back. At number 8, we are talking about a wave, but not a wave in any sense that the word usually carries. Not a swell, not a surge, not a seasonal flood. A wall. A moving, roaring, brown wall of Atlantic Ocean water that, twice a year, turns the Amazon River around and sends it running in the wrong direction. It is called the Pororoca. The name comes from the indigenous Tupi language and translates, roughly, as Great Roar. And anyone who has heard it from the riverbank will tell you the name is not an exaggeration. It begins offshore, where the Atlantic tide builds to a pressure the river cannot absorb, and then it comes. A wave up to 4 meters high, moving upstream at 25 kilometers per hour, carrying everything the river has ever deposited near its mouth, uprooted trees, tangled vegetation, river debris, plus everything the ocean wants to add. It does not slow down. It does not negotiate with the landscape. It tears century-old trees out of the bank the way a hand sweeps crumbs off a table, and it keeps going. 800 kilometers inland, still moving, still loud. Still 4 meters of churning brown water, demanding that the river accept, for a few hours, that the ocean is in charge. And then there are the surfers. Extreme athletes from Brazil, from Europe, from Australia, travel to the Amazon's mouth specifically to ride this wave, knowing that the water beneath their boards contains anacondas, caimans, and schools of piranha displaced from the flooded banks. The standing record for a continuous ride on the Pororoca is over 30 minutes. 30 minutes on a wave that does not stop, does not flatten, and does not care. That record was set not in the ocean, not on a manicured reef, but deep inside a jungle, surrounded by things that eat. The Pororoca is the Amazon announcing, twice a year, that the borders between river and ocean, between upstream and downstream, between what is supposed to happen and what actually happens, are entirely negotiable. And if that feels like a world where the rules of nature are being rewritten in real time, wait until you meet the tree that solved the problem of sunlight by simply getting up and walking toward it. At number 7, we meet something that forces you to reconsider what you thought a plant was allowed to do. The walking palm, Socratea exoryza, grows throughout the Amazon rainforest on a cluster of exposed stilt roots that fan outward from the base of the trunk like the legs of a giant spider. From a distance, the tree looks like it has been caught mid-step, like something interrupted it halfway through a decision. And according to local guides who have lived alongside these trees for generations, that is not far from the truth. The claim, and it is a claim that has sparked genuine scientific argument, is that the walking palm physically moves, that it abandons old roots as they rot and grows new ones in whatever direction offers the most light, inching toward gaps in the forest canopy at a rate of up to 20 meters per year. Not growing toward the light the way most plants do, passively, invisibly, actually relocating, picking a direction and committing to it. The science is genuinely unsettled on this. Some researchers have challenged the walking interpretation, arguing the movement is better explained by normal root competition and growth patterns. Others, working in the field with the trees directly, maintain that the displacement is real and that the mechanism is exactly what the guides have always described. What nobody disputes is this: these trees are regularly found at significant distances from where they originally sprouted, in positions that correlate with available light sources, on a root architecture that looks, structurally, like it was designed for exactly this purpose. The forest is rearranging itself. Slowly, quietly, over seasons and years, the trees are making choices. And if the idea of a jungle that physically reorganizes itself in the dark is already unsettling, Consider that the next entry involves a man who walked into that jungle, believed it was hiding an entire lost civilization, and was never seen again. At number 6, we arrive at a disappearance that has haunted exploration history for exactly 100 years. And the cruelest part is not that it happened. The cruelest part is what we found out afterward. Percy Fawcett was not a reckless man. He was arguably the most experienced jungle explorer alive in 1925. He had spent decades mapping unmapped territories across South America for the Royal Geographical Society, surviving conditions that killed the people around him, developing an almost supernatural instinct for terrain that destroyed other expeditions. He was methodical, physically extraordinary, and completely convinced of one thing. Somewhere deep in the Amazon basin, buried under centuries of jungle growth, there was a lost city. He called it City Z, not a village, not ruins, a sophisticated pre-Columbian civilization with roads, agriculture, and architecture, a city that the Amazon had simply swallowed and forgotten. In April of 1925, Fawcett walked into the Mato Grosso region of Brazil with his son Jack and a family friend named Raleigh Rymel. He sent one final letter from a camp he called Dead Horse. Then the jungle closed behind them. No bodies were ever recovered, no equipment, not a single identifiable object. He was simply gone, along with both young men, in a silence so complete it felt deliberate. What followed was arguably worse. Over the next several decades, more than 100 people died attempting to find out what happened to Fawcett. Rescue parties, journalists, adventurers, all consumed by the same territory that took him. The search for one man cost more lives than the original expedition. And then came the satellite data. Modern LiDAR scanning, the same technology used to find hidden temples beneath jungle canopy in Cambodia, confirmed that a complex pre-Columbian civilization did exist in exactly the region Fawcett was heading toward. He was right. He simply never came back to know it. The jungle kept that secret for a century, and it kept him too. Which brings us to number 5, and something that generates its own electricity. At number 5, we are talking about an animal that essentially weaponized electricity, and then, as if that were not enough, kept evolving until it figured out how to aim. The electric eel of the Amazon basin is not actually an eel, it is a knife fish, more closely related to catfish than to anything you would find in the ocean. That taxonomic detail is almost immediately irrelevant once you understand what it can do. The electric eel generates up to 860 volts of electrical discharge, nearly 4 times the voltage coming out of a standard household outlet. It uses this not as a last resort, but as its primary hunting strategy, its navigation system, and its first response to anything it considers a threat. For a long time, scientists assumed these animals hunted alone. Recent research overturned that assumption entirely. In certain Amazon lakes, electric eels have been observed hunting in coordinated groups of more than 100 individuals, herding schools of small fish into shallow water and then delivering synchronized high-voltage strikes, essentially turning the lake itself into a weapon. The water convulses, the fish have nowhere to go. What looks from the outside like chaos is, on closer inspection, organized predation. But the detail that genuinely unsettled researchers when it was first documented is this. When a threat approaches from above the waterline, a person standing on a bank, an animal leaning over to drink, the electric eel can leap partially out of the water, press its chin directly against the threat, and deliver a shock that intensifies with contact. The closer it gets, the more voltage reaches the target. It does not simply defend itself, it closes the distance on purpose. The Amazon, it turns out, hides an animal that conducts electricity, hunts in packs, and has worked out how to reach you even when you think you are standing safely on dry land. And if that feels like a creature that has run out of natural enemies, wait until you meet the thing that has been swimming in this same river, completely unchanged, for 23 million years. At number 4, we meet something that has been in this river longer than the river, in any form we would recognize, has existed. The arapaima. Say the name to anyone who studies freshwater biology and watch their expression shift into something between reverence and discomfort. This fish is not a curiosity. It is a document, a living record of what the Amazon looked like 23 million years ago, before the basin took its current shape, before the modern ecosystem assembled itself around it. And in all that time, the arapaima has not meaningfully changed, because it never needed to. It grows to 3 meters in length. It can weigh over 200 kilograms. Its scales are not scales in any ordinary sense. They are layered, interlocking armor, structured in a way that materials scientists have actually studied as a model for impact-resistant design. Piranha teeth, which can sever fingers, simply shatter against an arapaima's flank. The fish does not notice. It has teeth growing on its tongue, which is itself a rigid, bony structure it uses to pin prey against the roof of its mouth. It is built from every angle, like something that decided long ago it was done being prey, and has been making that point ever since. But here is the detail that makes the arapaima genuinely different from everything else in this river. It breathes air. Not through gills alone, through a modified swim bladder that functions like a primitive lung, absorbing oxygen directly. Which means that every 20 minutes, without exception, this armored leviathan must surface. And when it does, it exhales with a sound that carries across hundreds of meters of open water, a deep, audible wheeze, somewhere between a gasp and a cough, unmistakable once you have heard it. Fishermen have been locating arapaima by sound alone for generations. That breath is the only moment this creature is ever exposed. 23 million years of near-perfect design, and the one vulnerability is the need to come up for air. Which brings us to number 3, and something far more unsettling than any fish. Because the next entry is about people. People who are alive right now in this same jungle, who have chosen, deliberately, completely, to have nothing to do with the world you are watching this in. At number 3, we stop talking about animals and rivers and ghost towns. We start talking about people. Living people, right now, today, in the same jungle we have been describing. People who know the modern world exists and have decided, with complete clarity, that they want no part of it. Deep in the Javari Valley, a territory straddling the border between Brazil and Peru, up to 100 isolated human groups live in total separation from the outside world. No wheels, no written language, no phones, no medicine in any form we would recognize, no contact with any government or institution or stranger. When research aircraft pass over their villages, which happens carefully from altitude, warriors painted red run into the clearings below and fire arrows at the sky. Not out of ignorance, out of intention. They know something is up there. They are telling it to leave. And here is the part that reframes everything. These communities are not lost. They are not primitive in any meaningful sense of that word. They are survivors. Their ancestors lived through waves of colonial violence, disease, and forced displacement that destroyed hundreds of other Amazonian peoples entirely. The groups that remain uncontacted are, in the most literal sense, the ones who learned that contact kills. And they were right, because the biological reality is this. These communities carry zero immunity to diseases that most of the world treats as minor inconveniences. A common cold introduced by a single outsider could move through an uncontacted village within weeks and leave almost no one alive. A handshake, one handshake, carries that risk. Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency maintains a strict no-contact policy precisely because the math is that brutal. The jungle is not keeping these people hidden. They are keeping themselves hidden. And they are doing it because they understand something about the outside world that the outside world has never fully reckoned with. That is number 3. And if the idea of people choosing permanent invisibility to survive feels like the most human thing on this entire list, wait until you hear what is waiting at number 2. At number 2, we are going to a place that should not exist. Not according to geology, not according to any map of volcanic activity, not according to anything the scientific community was willing to accept until a young Peruvian geoscientist named Andrés Russo walked into the jungle with his equipment and measured it himself. Deep in the Peruvian Amazon, a river flows that will kill you if you fall in. Not because of what lives in it, because of the temperature. The Shanay Timpishka, which translates from the local Quechua as boiled with the heat of the sun, runs for 6 kilometers through the rainforest at temperatures ranging from 45 degrees Celsius at its edges to nearly 100 degrees at its center. That is not warm. That is not hot spring territory. That is the temperature at which food cooks. The temperature at which organic tissue breaks down within seconds. Animals that slip off the wet rocks along its banks do not drown. They are dead before they sink. And for decades, when people outside the region heard about this river, scientists included, the response was simple dismissal. There is no volcano within 700 kilometers of that location. Hydrothermal rivers of this scale and temperature require volcanic heat sources. The geology does not support it. Therefore, it cannot be real. Except it is real. Russo's measurements confirmed what the local Shipibo-Kanibo people and the shaman who showed him the river had known for generations. The heat does not come from a volcano. It comes from deep geothermal fractures in the Earth's crust, faults that tap heat from far below the surface and channel it upward through the rock until it reaches the riverbed. The mechanism is rare. A river of this length, this temperature, this scale, powered by that mechanism. There is nothing else like it anywhere on the planet. Nowhere. This is the only one. A boiling river in the middle of the Amazon, dismissed as legend, confirmed as fact, still flowing right now through a jungle that has apparently decided it has not surprised us enough. And that brings us finally to number 1. The entry that has been waiting at the end of this list since the beginning. The one that involves not a river, not a creature, not a geological impossibility, but a human choice made deliberately, repeatedly, in the name of something the rest of the world can barely comprehend. At number 1, we arrive at something that has no geological explanation, no satellite image, no ghost town or missing explorer attached to it. Just a pair of gloves and a boy, and a choice that has to be made 20 times before it counts. The Sateré-Mawe people of the Brazilian Amazon have a coming-of-age ritual built around the bullet ant, an insect that holds the highest pain rating on the Schmidt-Sting Pain Index, a scale scientists developed specifically to rank how much different venoms hurt. The bullet ant sits at the top, not because researchers are being dramatic, but because every person who has been stung describes the same thing. A sudden, white-hot, total pain that feels exactly like being shot. The name is not metaphor, it is testimony. And the venom does not fade in minutes the way a bee sting does. It causes uncontrollable trembling, fever, and waves of convulsions for 24 consecutive hours. A single ant, one sting. The ritual works like this. Hundreds of bullet ants are woven into gloves while sedated, stingers facing inward toward the wearer's hands. The ants wake up, and every young man seeking recognition as a warrior puts the gloves on for 10 full minutes, without making a sound. And then, because 10 minutes once is not the threshold, the ritual must be completed 20 times, spread across months, before the community considers it done. There is no trick to it, no numbing agent, no shortcut. Just a child's hands disappearing into a living gauntlet of something the human nervous system was designed to avoid at all costs, and the decision to stay still anyway. What makes this number one is not the pain. It is the meaning behind the endurance. In a place where survival has always demanded more than the body wants to give, the Satere Mawe found a way to make that demand visible, to hold it in your hands, literally, and prove you already know what the Amazon is going to ask of you for the rest of your life. 13 entries, one river, and somehow, at the end of all of it, the thing that stays with you is not the boiling water, or the reversing current, or the city the jungle ate. It is a pair of gloves. It is a boy standing still.
Because that is what the Amazon does. It keeps raising the stakes until the most extraordinary thing on the list turns out to be a human being choosing not to flinch. This river system does not care about our categories. It runs rivers that refuse to mix, grows trees that walk toward the light, hides people who have decided the modern world is not worth the risk, and boils water without a volcano anywhere in sight. It is not a backdrop. It is not scenery. It is an argument, a 6,000-kilometer argument that the planet is still doing things we have not figured out yet, and probably will not anytime soon. And somewhere in the Javari Valley right now, a warrior is painting himself red. Somewhere on the Peruvian border, a river is boiling. Somewhere in the forest, a palm tree is taking one more slow step toward the sun. The Amazon is not waiting for us to understand it. It is just continuing. If any entry on this list stopped you mid-scroll, made you sit up straighter, or genuinely changed the way you think about what this planet is capable of, tell us in the comments. Which one hit hardest? Would you surf the Pororoca? Would you put on the gloves? Subscribe if you want to keep going to the places the map still cannot fully explain. There are more of them than you think.